Hi there. I've been assigned 15 minutes, so I'll be very brief about what I think will be the most important keynote that's been given here at this conference. I come to this presentation prepared with about 6 months of research and investment looking into ARM, looking into what it means to this community, to open source, to Linux. I want to start out by saying that ARM is beautiful. This is an amazing platform. We have 5 billion processors that have been shipped by ARM last year. In contrast, probably less than 200 million by Intel. It's an architecture which is known for its power management characteristics. Its power management, the battery life on ARM devices is measured in days, not hours or minutes, as people that use laptops are more used to. It is a really compelling architecture because people take that IP that ARM produces. ARM doesn't produce actually the chips themselves, but ARM produces IP, which is an instruction set and the core architecture of the processor. And other companies take that IP and actually put that into silicon and ship that to companies that are building devices. So ARM is a beautiful thing. It's a really interesting model. It's low power. It's more and more high performance. These coming years, we're going to see SMP ARM devices. We'll see devices that showcase really, fantastic high-end computing on really low-power devices. ARM, is at the heart of mobile computing. It's something which is going to be everywhere. However, ARM is also very complicated. This interesting model, which allows you to take the IP and remix it into silicon and take that out to OEMs, which is a really interesting model, and it's a very interesting simile to open source, in which we're used to taking, portions of code and reusing it in different places for different purposes. So they share very similar characteristics. But ARM is also very complicated because if you have a wide variety of instances in which you've applied that IP, then it ends up that the software support for it tends being very complicated. And so people that are shipping devices are going to target them to different markets. They're going to be like cell phones, or they'll be tablets, or they'll be, base stations or wireless access points. So because there's a real variety in what people want to do with these processors, and because actually in the ARM architecture there's a lot of variety as well, it tends to get very complicated. As more and more software is required to build the user experiences that we expect, more and more software fragmentation happens. And so just to take a look at one example of where this happens. So if you look at the Linux kernel today, on the left-hand side here, what we have is a graphical representation of how many lines of code are inside the Arch subdirectory for x86. And so x86 is an interesting point there. So 230,000 lines of code, it's pretty much a unified platform. That means that the code, which supports platform code, is integrated. And this means it supports everything from 8086 down to the Core 2 Duo family, and this includes Morristown, an architecture which has, no ACPI, no programmable interrupt controller, no I/O ports, so just a very different architecture, and yet it's supported within the same tree. If we go and look at ARM, if you look at the size of the code base within the kernel, it's 3 times larger than the code base within the Intel portion of the kernel. That's really an interesting metric there. If you look, there are about 64 machine definitions inside those directories, and about 12 or 13 different platforms. This shows just how much diversity there exists in hardware support, and how much more work the people that are putting together Linux support for ARM hardware need to do. What I think is interesting to point out, though, is that this middle portion here, even though it's 3 times bigger than Intel, that's the good part. Because the reality is that this is stuff that people actually did get put into the upstream kernel. And this means that if you take a stock Linux kernel and you use that in the software which you're booting on your device, for the stuff which has been upstreamed, it worked. However, the reality is that there are hundreds of BSPs that are produced by silicon vendors today that go out there. And BSPs is going to be a kernel and some additional code that goes around it to support that hardware. Probably going to be hundreds of different versions of the kernel and versions of that middleware that is put out by the silicon vendors. And OEMs then take that kernel and further modify it. So the reality is that this goes off the charts. And so we my point is that I'm trying to make is that software for ARM today is very complicated. The software story for ARM is very complicated. Building a product out of ARM requires a lot of software investment. So, in this world-famous standoff, you have Charles Bronson on the other end. By the time this is over, no men are left standing. We are at the verge of a window of revolution. And I want to point out these points here, because I think this is really an interesting thought process there. So, step 0, mobile computing arrives in the real world. You know, we had phones 10 years ago. Today, we have computers in our hands. That's a really important distinction there. We had TVs 10 years ago. Now we have an interactive screen that's going to be touch-oriented, that will be internet-connected, and so on. So mobile computing, distributed computing has arrived in the real world. The old Corba days, you know, they've actually become reality in this new world of HTTP and XML-RPC and SOAP APIs on top of that. So mobile computing has arrived. iPhones have come to reset mobile consumer expectations. If somebody takes a device today and it doesn't work as well as the iPhone, everybody says, yeah, but it's not an iPhone. You know, everybody who's gonna, and this is the comparison that's made everywhere. People take the N900, so Nokia put out, it's great, but it doesn't have the apps. The user experience isn't as smooth. It's complicated. The device is bricky. So the iPhones has really reset the expectations from customers. And even though not everybody will have an iPhone, the general consensus is that it's a really attractive, really interesting platform. And so people want to buy them. And the OEMs want to produce and sell them. Windows, as we know it, the stuff that we see in people's computers and on screens and so on, and in airports and displays, does not run on ARM. This is a really interesting point. Windows does not run on ARM. Now, Intel has plunged into the world of mobile devices. This thing that I'm talking about, Morristown coming in, it's a radically new architecture. It's because Intel are rethinking that architecture for mobile devices. The fragmentation of Linux on ARM has gone critical. This is my thinking, but from this last slide that I look, this that I'm trying to point out, this fragmentation has gone critical there. It's much more difficult to build a device using Linux if it's ARM than if it's Intel. Android has shown up and really quickly filled a software void. You want software to put on this device that you're building, right? And you don't want your team to go out there and build their own entire user experience and application framework and do developer SDKs and so on. You have to be a very big company. It's a really big investment to do that. So Android, which Google has produced really masterfully, has come in and has filled that software void. So the question is, what happens next? I'm not going to answer that question, but I just want to point out some thinking behind those crossroads there. So I'm going to postulate that free software's future and ARM's fate are fundamentally linked. And for a short period of time, we can change the history of mobile computing. Now, if we fail, if we don't solve this fragmentation problem, if we don't bring things together, if we don't make this into a unified platform, then very few planetary giants will define what mobile open source is. And that's going to be Google or Intel or Nokia. So it's going to be a world in which very few players actually decide what the technology we consume are. And 30 years ago, MS-DOS was actually pretty cool. Fast forward to today, and we have a very different reality. So I'm very wary of this, of pushing technology so that you end up with very few suppliers. It's a dangerous place for us to be in. Now, if we succeed, if we're able to solve this fragmentation and we enable people to build different devices and different software experiences on top of this, then I think a world of great products, healthy variety, and competition is actually possible. Thanks. So I just want to talk about this in our context here. So Ubuntu on ARM and beyond. We started 2 years ago on an enablement program to make Ubuntu work great on ARM platforms. And this is the work of Dave Mandel and his team. It's been a fantastic experience. We've had incredible engagement from ARM, from the vendors, and from community. We've seen the engineers come in, help out, dig in, do a lot of important work. Now is the time for us to take the next step. And so if you look around what's happened at UDS this week, what is happening at UDS this week, you'll see 52 sessions. There's really important ARM-related work happening within the kernel, on the tool chain that's used to build Ubuntu, in middleware, which is important for mobile devices, and there's more. So go out there and look at the Ubuntu on ARM track. One interesting point to make is that because we want ARM to be in everybody's minds, there's a lot of companies that are working on producing commodity hardware. The most famous example is TI's BeagleBoard, which is a fantastic, really low cost, interesting device which you could use to pick it up, put Ubuntu on it, see how it behaves, test it out, do more development, think about what sort of products you want to build. So, I want you to remember these two things. The best thing about open source is variety. And if you want to talk to me about this more, because I don't have any more time, write to kiko@ubuntu.com or hash Ubuntu on ARM too. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Kiko. Now Rick Spencer is going to talk about the Maverick release process overview. If you're going to do a lightning talk on Friday, and feel free, please take some time this week to come up here and test your projector, because if on Friday you come and you're messing around and stuff, I'll just kick you to the back of the queue.
Oh, I'm not projecting.
Bryce?
No, I just have to go. Just give me a second.
We actually did test this though, so. All right.
Same image on all monitors. Apply.
All right.
Okay, so that worked exactly as expected. That was okay. Now where's Bryce? Bryce. All right. So where am I here? Gabi, no. This did unfortunately lead to me losing my place. This is really going to undermine the theme of my discussion here. Okay. Now are you guys ready for me to talk about being organized and disciplined? Okay. So, well, it's actually kind of cool following the ARM talk, because how cool is that? Like Ubuntu on ARM, Linux on ARM. All right, but first, I just want to have just a second to dwell on Lucid. Did anybody here use burn down charts? Look at our burn down charts in Lucid. All right, bunch of people. All right, this. Our productivity is really high right now, sky high. We got more done in Lucid than we did in Karmic, and we got more done in Karmic than we did in Jaunty. And I'm not sure I can do all the letters of the alphabet backwards, so I'm going to stop there. So our productivity is real high, which means we're getting tons of great features into the product, and I think Lucid speaks for itself. But we talked about the chasm, right? So this is really, we are at we're at a fulcrum right now. We're going to tip over and be a huge mainstream product, and we're going to take free and open source software to millions and millions and millions of more people. But one of the key things about this is that the people on the left-hand side of the chasm and the right-hand side of the chasm are qualitatively different from each other. We all live on the left-hand side of the chasm, and we're making a product for people on the right-hand side of the chasm. And this is going to impact the way that we work in the Maverick, starting in Maverick. So this is called a polygon display, and it's a way of showing related variables. And it was invented for anesthesiologists, so they could see and get a shape of how the patient's doing. If it's really small, then the patient's collapsing. If it's really big, then they're doing other things. And so this is a way to represent us as tech enthusiasts along several parameters, like what we look for in a product. And some of these are things that we want more and more of, and some of these represent tolerances. So if you look right here, this is sort of this bug-free category. We actually, as tech enthusiasts, do accept some degree of buggy software. And when we have bugs in our software, we often look at it as kind of a puzzle. I'm going to solve this bug, I'm going to interact with the upstream developer, and we have this we feel like it's a contribution solving that bug. And you know what? It's got bugs, but it's got all these other important qualities that I care about, it's cutting edge and it's customizable. Mainstream users have a very different shape. And you see this bug-free category, their expectation is it will be totally bug-free. So we see a bug, and it's a puzzle. It's something that engages us, we want to fix, we want to know what causes it. A mainstream users fix a bug, and it's crap. They have no interest in pursuing that project anymore. Has anyone seen this with their spouses or their other people in their family? Like, okay. So, as you see, there is quite a bit of overlap. We're not going to say, like, we're only going to create products for mainstream users. We want to use it too. So it's still going to be for us as tech enthusiasts, but it's also going to be for mainstream users. And if you look at Lucid, you can see that we actually did a pretty good job. That's this yellow one of matching the tech enthusiast shape there. So I think you can see why we got so much uptake. We're doing we're making a good product for ourselves. And I would say actually in Maverick we made some progress. Well, I mean, in Maverick we need to make some progress down this bug-free line. And if we can pull that down, tug that down a little bit, you see that we're going to match both shapes and we're going to have coverage pretty well. So we're going to be looking to maintain our high level of productivity, right? So on the desktop, we're not saying like we're going to have sacrifice features for quality. We're going to say we're going to be just as productive, but we're going to have quality too. So we're going to bring down that bug count from that mainstream user's point of view. And the way that we're going to do that is by bringing a bit more discipline to following our release schedule. So everyone here needs to be aware of this, because in previous releases we have managed deviations in a very sensible way. For instance, something that came after feature freeze, we would be very sensibly mark, this is a feature freeze exception, people have to know about this feature freeze exception so they can accommodate it, etc. Some things would be rejected, but by and large most things would be accepted. There's going to be much more of a bias towards rejecting things that that would break freeze, okay? So I don't think this is going to be easy cultural shift for us. We're very used to like having some flexibility there. As somebody who I very much admired put it, freezes are limits, they're not targets. So being very close but after the freeze is not the same as being very close to but before the freeze date. I'm getting like interesting looks from Steve Langasek here. I hope that they're supportive. And okay, so we're finally just everyone should be aware that we're going to continue with the work item iterations, and these are the current dates that are mapped out here. Have the dates changed at this point? Does anyone? There was some release talk of bringing in the release date a bit. Has that happened yet? Anyone? Okay. Okay, so Alpha 2 is going to be, we're going to target work item iteration for Alpha 2, work item iteration for Alpha 3, final work iteration for Alpha 4. This time they're going to be in descending periods, so they'll get a little bit smaller as they go. So we'll need to put less work into each work item as we converge on a solid release. So that's it, that's all.
All right, finished early. So talk when he gets ready, introduce him. I'll just wait.
So, hello everyone. My name is David Planella, and I coordinate translations in Ubuntu. So there I get the privilege to work with our wonderful Ubuntu translation teams, which are basically those people who bring you localized distribution in your own language. Yeah, there you go, our names in there. So together with Henning from the Launchpad Translations teams, we'll try to give you an overview of the work that has been done in Launchpad Translations in the last cycle, and which will be continued in this next cycle in terms of getting better integration support for Ubuntu translations and upstreams. So, as I was saying, Henning is the only representative this time at UDS from the translations teams. They are usually here at UDS, so just to put some faces to the names, perhaps we should just show a really hardworking team, as you see in their last coding sprint in Recife, Brazil. So they look at the locations very carefully, so they get a lot of work done, as you can see here. So basically, from our left, there's Danny. Oops.
Uh-oh.
Can you just go back, please?
What's not?
Oh, well, never mind.
My keyboard is gone.
Never mind. We'll... Oh, okay.
Doesn't go back.
Never
It just
mind.
goes forward.
Just go straight to the subject.
Too bad a picture, yeah.
Let's just go back to. Let's just go straight to the
Anyway,
point.
go ahead.
So basically, I'll try to answer some basic questions. First of all, how is Ubuntu translated? Well, that's an easy one. It's basically translated by the Ubuntu translation teams. There's usually one team per language, and that's those fellows you see over there with the Ubuntu icon. And they do their work in Launchpad translations, which is a tool we provide to make it possible to translate Ubuntu. We don't have to forget, though, that a lot of the translation work we get in Ubuntu as well comes from the great work of our upstream contributors. There's lots of, as we know, in Ubuntu, we get the best of breed free software, and that includes, of course, translations as well. So they get imported into Ubuntu as well, and that's the upstream projects we see at the top there. I also have to say that sometimes there's not a clear difference between upstream project translations and upstream translators and Ubuntu translators. Often in the teams where there's best collaboration, they're basically the same people, and they just or there's a couple of people from upstream in Ubuntu, and there's a couple of Ubuntu people in upstream. So just basically to illustrate the workflow, what happens here in the most general cases is that translations get done upstream from the upstream projects. They come from the top. Then these translations get imported into Launchpad translations, and their translations translators from Ubuntu do their work. What they do is they either complete translations from upstream, or they translate specifically only Ubuntu-specific packages, or they fix spelling mistakes or whatever needs to be fixed. What happens then is the technical part. Those translations get processed by a program we've got called Langpacomatic, and what it does is basically just fetch those translations from Launchpad and create language packs, one per each language. So this is ultimately what the user will see in when they get the translations in their system. So let's try perhaps the next one. So another basic question: why do we use Launchpad translations at all? Why don't we just use upstream translations? That's the first question to ask is why do we want translations? That's part of the Ubuntu philosophy. At the very core of the Ubuntu philosophy, we say that we believe that that every computer user should be able to use software in their own language, and starting from that premise, I think it's just only natural that we provide the tools to make this possible, and not only make this possible, but just make it best translated around. What else is interesting from Launchpad translations? We've got a lot of packages, a lot of projects integrated into Ubuntu. Sometimes it's difficult to keep track of everything that needs to be translated. So what Launchpad translations does as well is provide a unified interface to those translations. So from one place, you can just go and translate everything that needs to be localized in Ubuntu. Low entry barrier. Launchpad translations provides a very nice UI, very clean UI to do your work as a translator. And what we find really important in Ubuntu as well is to make it easier for contributors to start helping in Ubuntu, and that's something that we thrive on with the Launchpad translations. The other thing as well is we Also, Launchpad Translations allows us as well to provide regular translation updates. That means that we don't depend on the packages themselves or on the applications when they do translation updates. They can be delivered independently and regularly. I mean, this is especially important in LTS releases where these releases have to be maintained for years. And so that effectively means that you can keep translating this release for years and keep providing fixes independently of the packages. So now let's get straight to the subject. How is Ubuntu translated and how translations are imported today? So basically what you see in this in the bottom line is that's basically the timeline of an upstream project. And what you see basically here is hello? Yeah, good. So at the bottom, we can see, as I say, the timeline of an upstream project and how upstream translators do their work. So what basically happens here is that there's continuous work on the VCS and downstream. Oh, thank you, Annie. So which one? There you go. So that's the one. And you can see here as well, these little fellows here are the upstream translators. Where they continually do their work directly in the VCS. These translations only are made available when there's an upstream release. That's basically a tarball, and they get released at regular intervals. How do these translations get into Launchpad? The only way that we can get these translations into Launchpad today is by source packages. So what we do in Ubuntu is basically package those tarballs into packages, and once we upload the package, they get into Launchpad. So that's the only way translations can get imported into Launchpad today. So that means basically that we haven't got regular update. Okay, I need to be quicker. So basically, there's discrete updates in Ubuntu translations. So translators only get to see those translations from upstream when there is a package upload. So that means that if there's any period where there's no package upload, here you can see a period in which translations from upstream wouldn't get into Ubuntu. So if the teams from Ubuntu don't work closely with the teams from upstream, there's really it's a potential case for the application of FR where things are translated upstream and things are translated in Ubuntu as well, because this just doesn't go the full path to Launchpad. So how translations are contributed back today? How do we send these translations upstream? It's currently not possible to do this automatically, so we rely on the work of translation teams to do this manually. What happens today is that the teams that want to work in Launchpad need to export those translations manually, and they need to send them manually to upstream. That means that this requires technical knowledge in the sense that they need to know every way of sending translations to upstream, which also means a lot of work for them. I'm just saying this to illustrate the challenges in sending back contributions to upstream when you're translating in Launchpad, because there's every upstream has different methods of managing translations. And here's where the part Henning will explain, and that's about solving or tackling these challenges we've got with translations.
Okay, first I'd like to say some words about Launchpad. Launchpad was open sourced about 10 months ago, and we've had some great contributions, and I'd just like to just to point out those great contributors we've had. There's William Grant, who's done a lot of contributions, Adi Royban, who's here with us, and also Max Bauster, and that would be great if we could give them a hand, just because they've contributed to Launchpad, and that's wonderful. And of course, everybody's invited to do that, so I give you the link later. Okay, after the open sourcing, the Launchpad team went out on the mission to bridge the gap. It's not the chasm we saw earlier. This is the gap between the upstream projects and the and Ubuntu, or the packages in Ubuntu, where there was a need to improve coordination and communication. And the problem, obviously, is that we don't always do it that well. So we need to. We need to make that a priority. There have been sessions here at UDS, how that's been done for code and also for bugs. And I'd like to explain a little bit about how that works for translations. Let's see. Okay, we saw something similar just now. So this is how it will be done in the future. We have started importing I think most of main packages are already imported as Bazaar branches in Launchpad. So they are available as separate projects, and instead of relying on the package imports, we will be drawing directly from those Bazaar branches, which are tracking basically the upstream VCS. And so we have an always up-to-date copy of that in Launchpad, and can take those translations from there and input them into Launchpad translations, so that the Ubuntu translators that are doing the work will be working with the latest translations that are available from upstream, and so duplication of work is minimized. Okay, so one thing about sharing translations, you may know about sharing translations, which is in place already for sharing between series. So if you're doing translations in Maverick today, these changes will automatically be reflected in Lucid and in Karmic. You'll see there's no need to copy them back or do anything like that. So we're already sharing translations between series. Now we're going to start sharing translations also between Launchpad projects. As I said, all upstream projects are now represented in Launchpad as separate projects, and they have their branch there. And on the other hand, there's the source package which we've been working with so far, and they draw on the same database, so they store the translations in the same database and draw from the same strings. So whenever I do a translation here, so I see the same English string on both sides, and I see the translation here, it'll automatically appear here. Now, sometimes there may be differences. For some reason, we are translating something different here. Then it will be marked on this side. We can see that there's a different translation in Ubuntu for the same string, and the other way around, we'll see in Ubuntu that there's a different translation upstream, and we can just either fix that by making them the same and choose which one to choose, or if there's a reason to leave it as it is. Okay, so that's what sharing translations is about. Okay, so this is the picture from earlier. The upstream projects get imported into a Launchpad project, which shares its translations with the source package, and then basically go down to the language pack. We still need the teams to work together, but as I explained in the earlier slide, that's now easier possible because the upstream changes are reflected immediately, and also the changes from the source package that the Ubuntu translators do are reflected immediately. Okay, now there's the other problem that we had about contributing back to upstream, and the really only automatic solution that we can see is when upstream uses Launchpad. That's when actually the providing back gets automatic. And in that case, both translator groups are combined to one. They work in Launchpad on the translations, which are then reflected obviously in Ubuntu and back. And whenever the project decides to release, they'll have the same translations as Ubuntu has. I don't know if everybody's aware of that. You don't have to use all of Launchpad in order to use Launchpad translations. You can just select which part of Launchpad you're using, and so this is the way we'd see it possible to actually have automatic providing back. All right, that's all. Here you can find some more information about that. The general Launchpad roadmap, the blueprint, which is about these features. And if you wish to provide, please go to dev.launchpad.net. Thank you.
You can talk from here.
talk from here, yeah?
Okay.
That's all right. Now, hopefully this functions. Yay.
Just remember to introduce yourself.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Bruno Mark. I'm from Dalton Mark, and we are the font guys. We are the guys who are designing new Ubuntu fonts. This little introduction, I just want to give you an overview of what I'm going to be talking about at 3 o'clock in one of the rooms here, where I'm going to go into more detail about the whole Ubuntu font development, how it all came about, how the design came about as it is today, what we're planning to do into the future, etc., etc. So that's 3 o'clock, a bit later. Right. This is the best font that's going to be happening. Absolutely, Absolutely. And I mean, you look at it, it is much nicer. It's been a fairly long way coming, several months' work between the Ubuntu design team and ourselves, to come up with the right kind of like expression for the corporate identity, or for the identity of the GUI, and of what Ubuntu should, look like, and getting something contemporary out there that will look into the future. Just give you a quick overview for those people who won't be able to attend the session. Some of the designs that we've had before, several variations, assessing them on paper, in print, at small sizes, at large sizes, assessing them on the screen as well, because the Ubuntu font is also going to be your GUI font eventually. This is what you're going to be seeing when you pull down your menu. And it is quite interesting, the guys about the languages or the translations. The Ubuntu font will support loads of languages. So you can translate to your heart's content, until you're blue in your face. The Ubuntu fonts will support it, And then the speaker previously was saying, someone mentioned to bring the deadline forward to freeze. No, don't, because I'm nowhere near ready yet. So leave the deadline, leave the freeze where it is, because I will have enough time, right? So quick overview, great designs, that we came up with. We've tested the designs in print, on the screen and stuff, and eventually decided for this design, those 4 characters. By the way, in terms of typeface design, those 4 characters are your most basic and controlling characters. With those, nothing goes. Those 4 characters, N-O, H-O, actually define about 80% of a typeface design. All the stylistics and the characteristics. Without those, I can't proceed. But the great thing is the Ubuntu font family will come in the regular, bold, italic, and bold italic as its basic system font setup. Eventually, it will also have a light, a medium, plus the italics, and monospaced in the 4 weights. And it will have a condensed regular as well. Exactly how these fonts are going to be used eventually, I am not quite aware yet. This is something that the Ubuntu design team will obviously discuss and play around with. But it's great to have this breadth, this variety of font styles available, to allow you to do all sorts of various stuff. So this is sort of like the design stuff, that we were talking about. Now, script support. Again, we're coming back to the translations. The initial release of the 4 basic font styles for the software freeze, the regular bold, italic, and bold italic, will contain Latin, Greek, and Cyrillic. Now, when I say Latin, that's obviously not just English. It will be Latin A and B extended. So that alone already will cover about 150 languages, including some of the weirdest African dialects as well, you can imagine. Greek will not only be monotonic, no, it will be polytonic. So if any of you guys does Greek classical text or academic translations, you can do that with the Ubuntu fonts. We're even going so far that we're having stylistic variations in the font of the iota characters, which you can access via OpenType features. And the Cyrillic will be Cyrillic extended to also include some of the more minority languages all the way out there in Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, and Uzbekistan, and wherever. So altogether, eventually, the font will have about 1,200 glyphs covering those 3 script systems, altogether covering probably in the region of about 200 to 250 languages, covering in the region of about 3 billion people who use those 3 scripts. So I think this is a pretty cool thing that this font develops. Techie stuff, I will be talking a little bit more in detail as well. The main thing is that the Ubuntu fonts are going to be fully hinted. So they will look good on the screen. Whether you are running a very old black and white CRT machine or the latest gear for sub-pixeling and all sorts of stuff, yeah, they will look good on the screen. They will look good on your GUI, in every environment. They are so good, you can even take them off the system and stick them onto a mobile phone if you want. They will still look good because they're fully hinted. Other techie stuff that we have in there, they will be OpenType, of course, TTF based, and they will contain OpenType features, stylistic features, as I mentioned with the Greek polytonic stuff, but also typographic features. So, for example, the numerals will not only be simple numerals in tabular motion on your basic keyboard. If you switch on the correct OpenType feature, you can also have proportionally spaced numerals. You can have superiors, inferiors, numerators, denominators, fractions. The whole works. And if some people are really keen, eventually we can build in small caps and we can build swash characters and whatever you want. I mean, we can go into eternity with this. So. Hinting, this is what I'm going to be showing a little bit, and probably giving a quick live demo how we're doing the hinting. And please come and listen to me at 3 o'clock. Thank you.
We have about 3 minutes for questions for fonts. Anybody? Oh, okay.
So I'm pretty sure that there's nobody on the canonical design team who actually speaks Kazakh or Azerbaijani. Is there going to be usability testing of the language-specific glyphs with users who are familiar with the scripts?
Some of the characters we have already tested with Russian speakers or Cyrillic readers because there are variants of Cyrillic characters. So yes, their legibility has been tested with colleagues of ours, who are Cyrillic speaking typographers. The same goes for the Greek as well, where we have tested it, made sure that they do conform to today's, expectations as far as legibility, as far as character design is concerned. Yes. Oh yes, Ivanka, I'm sure you.
And I read Cyrillic and write it. So we didn't just send out the font to Bruno's colleagues, but we have been exploring it internally. And in the next session, and with the help of Jono, we're going to be talking about how we can get it tested and how we can get it out there as much as possible. Because the font is, so absolutely, it will be tested with as many people as possible. And normally, Bruno's guys send out a Russian text, but I sent them a political Serbian text, so I could check it out. So yes, it's very good.
When can we have A to Z, 1 to 10, or 1 to 9, or 0 to 9, capitals and lowercase, just so that we can start doing material and designing stuff, logos and things with it?
I'm going to leave that to you.
Well, we need to package it up as a where is Jono here? No. So John and I talked about it being Mark talked about it being an open beta font. I don't have a date yet, but it's imminent. And I'll try and make sure a date is agreed this week. Looking at Bruno.
Yeah. Well,
so just so that we can show you some, so that we can start sharing it properly. I'm sorry I haven't got the date straight for this talk. That's a big omission of mine. Apologies.
I think here it is quite, we have to be a bit careful as well with the release. Fonts tend to be like viruses. Once a font is out there, even as a beta, it's out there, and millions of people will start using it. So we have to be very, very careful with the management of intermediate stages as well. Otherwise we're just going to have different versions out there, and there's going to be conflicts and all sorts of nightmares, and we're going to be ending up doing support until the rest of our lives. And quite frankly, I want to avoid that.
It looks from the screenshots like you're using proprietary software to make the font, and I understand that's the industry standard that you'd be using for everything else you do. For people who want to work on this using free software, what's the options?
Oh, blimey, that's a good one. Well, I mean, eventually you can use on the font. You can work on the font files. They're going to be TTF files, so you can open up those and carry on working with them. But all the source files, I assume, will be made available. I don't know. I don't want to make a promise here.
Ian, do you know about the licensing?
Yeah, the source will be made available. The only reason they're using those tools is because that's what they use. They know how to use them. There may be things that they've done more easily that we can't do with our stuff yet, but yeah, you'll be able to open it up and you'll be able to play.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, some of the stuff that we're using, like, for example, to hint the fonts, is actually a Microsoft tool, Visual TrueType, which you can get for free from our friends at Microsoft. The other tool, the font design tool, is FontLab. Yes, this is a commercial product. It is the industry standard tool, and it allows you to make really good fonts, and pack all that you need to do into one file.
Will the font include mathematical symbols?
Basic stuff, yes. The basic mathematical symbols, but nothing too elaborate and extended.
I noticed the kerning on your first slide already differs from that in the logo that we have in vector format. One thing I'm really worried about in the beta process is the metrics. We've got a system, you can improve the glyphs themselves on and on, but how are you going to cope with improving metrics and having people's documents reflow and look completely different?
Right. There's two issues. What you refer to as kerning is actually spacing. Because kerning refers to the space correction of critical pair combinations such as cap T, cap A. The overall look and feel, the overall tracking, is called the spacing. Now in the Ubuntu logo, it is kept being a bit tighter because it is a logo. It's being used, primarily, I'd say, in larger sizes. So therefore you want to keep the characters a little bit tighter. The fonts are spaced and designed for usage at small sizes, at Riesing sizes. That's where they are optimized for, which of course means that once you start using them at larger sizes, they look a little bit open, so you may have to do some manual tracking if you want to go into micro typography on this, But before a beta release is coming out, those fonts will be fully spaced, fully kerned, fully tested. So we are not, that beta font is going to be a set down. I am not going to muck around with that anymore, because we're too far down the line for that. But it's been tested and read, etc. So, yes, it's good.
And one last question.
Actually, not a question, it's the answer to the previous question. We do have one open source tool for font editing, which is called FontForge. It's actually in main. It's shipped with Ubuntu by default. This one is unfortunately not able to read or write the FontLab source code. It can only deal with TrueType files, which are binary compiled files. So the result may not be the same like we have on FontLab. The functions for editing the hintings, the instructions and so on are different, so you may not get the same results. That's just my comment for this.
That was last question, sorry. All right, thank you very much.